are here as men of peace, but we are here also to declare our full and forthright support of what is in great measure a military alliance.
But in the background is a much wider and more suggestive question connected with the fact that Canada seems to have moved from a pre-national to a post-national phase of existence without ever having been a nation.
That bigness and complexity are functions not so much of numbers as of ideas.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years we've done it with one signature of a pen. You've reversed that, thrown us into the north-south influence of the United States.
Good evening and welcome to the podcast of the Red Ensign. This is the 11th episode. This is going to be a bit of a different episode today. I'm here with my friend Desir, who is a cartoonist. Welcome, Desir. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
And what we're going to do tonight, the very first article that I published at the Red Ensign was a profile of Donald Alexander Smith, who came to be known as Lord Strathcona, a profile of a great Canadian intended to provide by example a footprint to be followed for Canadians today. I thought one of the best ways we could get our feet into Canadian culture and out of Canadian politics for a stretch would be to profile some great Canadians. And the first up here is Richard Williams, who is a very famous Canadian animator. So we have an expert here to talk to us about that. But I want to make it part of a broader set of episodes that address Canadian culture. I'm not sure whether I'll keep them under the main Red Ensign podcast banner or whether we'll break it into a different show. You can let me know in the comments below whether you'd like a separate playlist or something. But we're going to take a few minutes tonight, look at his work, look at his life, and reflect on the kind of artistic, the kind of art that Canada from a previous era was able to deliver, why we were able to deliver that as a people and produce, excellent individuals like Richard Williams, and reflect on what that means for us today and going forward. So, tell me a little bit about Richard Williams. Who was he? Why is he important in the history of animation? And what are we hoping to get out of this series?
Right. So I figured that it's summertime. It's time for blockbusters. It's time for walking out of the theater and wondering what the hell you watched the last 2 hours. But there was not always a time, good sir. There was a time where you could actually enjoy your time in the theaters, and Williams was a part of that. Richard Williams was a absolutely brilliant animator who, as we'll find out over the course of this series, was able to keep alive the tradition of old Hollywood animation that made the studios like Disney and Warner Bros. Such sensations, while at the same time leaving behind a legacy that all animators today still follow.
Yeah, when you brought the topic to me, I had vaguely heard of Richard Williams, but I didn't know very much about him. So I went and looked up some of the stuff that he had done, and a lot of it was just, first of all, stuff that I thought that it was really excellent, and second, stuff that when I look at animation today, the state of children's movies, and animated movies,
it's bad.
I've felt for a long time that it's an industry that has been in decline, and that ironically, the tools that make it easier to produce animated films, the computer animation tools that are being used, seem, the better the tools get, the worse the quality of the art seems to get. And I'm not sure whether there's I don't know enough about it to know whether those two things are connected or whether it's just that the fact that it's a lot cheaper to make means that a lot more crappy stuff gets made. I haven't really wrapped my head around it, but certainly there's some value in going back to see what made the art form great. Because I mean, there really were a whole collection of really great pieces of animated art from a previous era, and Williams was part of that, so we should celebrate it and have a look at it.
Absolutely.
So before we get started, before we get to his work, let's talk about Williams the man a little bit. So tell me a little bit about him.
Sure. So just a little bit of family background. So Richard Williams was born as Richard Edmund Lane, March 19th, 1933 in Toronto, to Leslie Lane, who was a British painter and photographic retoucher, and Kathleen K. Bell, who was a well-respected commercial illustrator at the time. Now, his father did leave when Richard was just a baby, but his mother thankfully would quickly remarry to Kenneth D.C. Williams, who was an advertising executive at Bridgens, which was a print and design studio in Toronto. Unfortunately, that studio is no longer around. Our art in the city has died a very painful death.
Yes. Well, Toronto is an interesting place at the moment.
So sad.
But it's worth noting here.
So he was basically born surrounded by art. That's very important to point out, that while he definitely worked hard, in a sense, he was born into a very artistically gifted family who had connections.
Well, yeah, there's layers to this. So on the one hand, he had the opportunity to be very exposed to art from a very young age. He came from people who obviously had a predisposition to it. And his stepfather, whose name he adopted, was an executive at a studio placed to get him a start.
Correct.
So you can see a whole bunch of ways in which Williams was obviously talented in his own right, but he was also a product of the society around him. The fact that there were studios, the fact that his parents were positioned in the way they were, obviously had a big influence on him getting going.
No, that's absolutely correct. This is a very important thing that a lot of people in this sphere don't quite recognize when it comes to art. In many ways, art is kind of a trade, and it does need to be nurtured. You do get geniuses like Michelangelo or Galileo who are able to kind of just produce things naturally, but for the most part, if you want to have like a Spielberg or someone like that, even though people like us might have criticisms of Spielberg, someone like him was trained on the original masters before going forward. Art does need to be cultivated like any other trade.
Yeah, and trades are cultivated generationally. This is something that gets lost in kind of
modernity.
Yeah, I mean, but if you actually speak to tradespeople, the overwhelming majority of skilled tradespeople picked up the trade from a father or an uncle or a cousin or somebody like that. They didn't go to a trade school and learn it. And this kind of managerial philosophy of you go to school to learn a skill rather than going and participating in it as a kind of weak apprentice. This has never really penetrated the trades because it's such a bad way to educate people in the trades.
Plus, you need certain trades for a society to function.
Yeah, and I just think there's a number of reasons for that it's you can talk about in different trades. I think for a lot of them, it's partly because by the time you're 18, you should have acquired a whole set of skills that are integral in the trade. And if you didn't start quite a bit earlier than that, going to like art school or trade school or something is
it's a setback.
Yeah, you're a long way behind before you come in the door.
It is possible to recover. I've known people who do it, but it is a setback.
Yeah, and this kind of generational cultivation of the skill. if you're able to maintain a culture where you can cultivate it, it's a huge advantage to the quality of art produced, a huge advantage to the quality of, stonework produced or any other trade, right? So I think that's really worth pointing out off the top here, and pointing out, as we try to take away from William's legacy, it's something for us to take away when we think about our own children and the continuation of our own culture.
Yeah, no, it has to be maintained and cultivated.
So,
so just to go on, so Williams grew up Gulfdale Road, North York, Toronto. Now, one thing to quickly point out, even at a very young age, Richard was not just gifted artistically, but also a bit of a performer. He and his friend Martin Hunter would set up magic and comedy shows for the neighborhood, and they would actually bring in a fair amount of money, approximately $300 in today's currency, which not bad for a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
Now, that's also very important because for animation, it's not just a matter of being a good artist. You need to be a good performer. There's a very fine line between illustrator and animator. While the two definitely have a lot in common, they ultimately are different professions. I know a lot of really good illustrators who just can't get into the mood of animation, and vice versa.
Yeah, I guess animation has a storytelling element that is, that's indispensable to it. Is that right?
It relies a lot on acting and performance.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of overlap between like stage acting as a set of skills and the set of. So it's one of these things where you need a complicated stack of skills that not a lot of people are going to have to be really excellent at it. Is that a fair assessment?
That's correct. You need to be able to draw efficiently well and also be able to act to a certain degree.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what Scott Adams says about the stack of skills he had to produce Dilbert. He's kind of funny. He's kind of good at drawing, and I think he's got 4 or 5 other skills that he says that he put together in order to make it successful. In the same way, acting is a skill. Understanding story is kind of a skill, and then obviously
artistic capability.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right. So one other quick thing to point out, like many children, Williams was read bedtime stories growing up. He was particularly fond of the Arabian Nights, and that will come back to play a very important role in his life later on, for both good and for bad.
Yeah.
So he attended Northern Secondary School. Also, a little thing, he would play the trumpet, and that would also be a very important hobby in his life. He would play in a lot of jazz bands. It was later on, it would be an important part of his income, but not a huge part of his life, but just a side thing. And again, it's important to point out that for people like Williams, they had these abilities. Like, he was able to do one thing, but then do another. It's one thing that a lot of people kind of focus on today, the idea of just max focusing on one skill set. And while I understand that from the sense of you want to be really good at one thing, it was expected that you would be able to excel in multiple things. Like, even if it was just, being able to sing decently in your church choir, or, being able to play piano. These are small things that were just expected of people that, sadly, you can't really get today.
I mean, they're part of a healthy culture. Mm-hmm. I look at the way I raise my kids. I try to expose them to, a certain basic level of sports, a certain basic level of art, a certain basic level of music, a certain basic level of all of these various different skills, knowing that there will be a few of them that they really excel at. Mm-hmm. But if you look at people educated from this era in Canada, they had a pretty broad foundation. Mm-hmm. And some of what you see in the influences in, like, if you went around to households today and asked and tried to find the number of kids who had a comparable literary experience to being read 1001 Arabian Nights as a child, you'd find that, you wouldn't find a lot of kids exposed that way,
I mean, you might find some of the new people coming in, but that's a different story.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So now at age, sorry, just quickly. So at age 15, this is quite important. Williams actually took a 5-day bus ride from Toronto to Los Angeles, where he would actually get a tour of the Disney studio. His mom called a friend at the studio and was actually able to get Williams in behind the scenes to actually meet some of the animators personally. We have some clips there of him actually, some pictures there at the bottom of him actually looking at some of the storyboards and getting to meet one of the storyboard artists at Disney. So,
yeah, I mean, this is kind of amazing. A
again,
5-day bus ride by himself.
Yeah, you could just do this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are the kinds of opportunities that a higher trust society kind of makes possible.
Yeah.
So, interesting.
Yeah. So, when Williams was at the studio, one piece of advice that he got from the storyboard artist was to focus on drawing. The best piece, he was told, like, look, you can learn the animation techniques later, become a good artist, become a good artist, become a good artist. So, Williams would dedicate the next few years of his life to mastering the fine arts. He would enroll into the fine arts program at OCAD, while also doing work as a commercial artist for his fathers at Bridgens. Eventually, though, he came across the work of the famous Dutch painter Rembrandt at the Toronto Art Gallery of Ontario, and it just moved him to tears. He says that upon looking at the paintings of Rembrandt, he understood what art was about and its importance. And so he would dedicate the next few years of his life specifically to painting. Again, one thing he would do, which you just can't really do today, he just packed up and went to live in Spain for a few years. And while in Spain, he would, again, focus on painting. Now, unfortunately for poor Richie, the fine arts world is not what it's cracked up to be. One of our mutuals, Ben Fleming, on his podcast, Radio Free History, a few weeks back on the episode Dollar Store Donatello, he made the joke that the post-impressionist world was made up of the wives of rich Northwestern Americans buying weird art to appear cultured when in London and Paris. Well, Ben, turns out you're not too wrong, pal. According to Williams, the art world was just paintings done to please the wives of rich industrialists. It was a terrible way to live. Quote.
Yeah, this is interesting. So I guess this is based on his dates. That what years would he have been in Spain?
So in Spain, let's see. Yeah, so he left Canada in 1953. Yeah, and so so 1953 to 1955. So what we're getting at here is a real decline in patronage. Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the history of painting to properly locate in time when the decline in patronage for fine art began. But certainly by this time, one of the big things I would say is the creation of the photograph. Yeah. This is very important because, again, going back to arts being a trade, for the longest time, most artists, like I would say 80% of their incomes was done through portrait paintings because you needed it. You needed someone who could paint the king, the mayor. Yeah. If you were a wealthy industrialist or like a dentist, you wanted a painting because it was, in a sense, immortality. With the creation of the photograph, it really did kind of just fundamentally alter the patronage game. The photograph was to painting what the car was to horseshoes, is the best way to describe it. Yeah. There's still horseshoes today, but it's not the same the industry that it was. Yeah, interesting. So we're now in the 50s.
I guess about 70 years on from photography becoming reasonably accessible, and you now have this very kind of frivolous patronage that's going on of, let's say, declining artistic taste. So it's unfortunate, and he pursues this for 2 years, and then he goes home.
No, so he tries his hand at the art world in Spain for 2 years. He doesn't go home. Instead, he decides to go to Old Blighty.
Okay.
Williams actually was able to meet up with another Canadian, George Dunning, who had an animation studio in the UK, TV Cartoons Limited. So no, he actually doesn't go back to Canada. He goes to the UK to work with another Canadian.
Yeah, okay. That's an interesting view of the world as it existed in the late 50s.
Well, this is just one thing to, again, kind of point out about just kind of the uniqueness of what Canada could produce. The fact that we were a people at one point who could just go to other places and set up shop. Again, for George, just a little bit about him. He did the animation for Yellow Submarine, which, while not Disney level quality, is definitely, it had a cult following, and it did prove that you could do stylized animation on a much lower budget. And that is, again, kind of a uniquely Canadian thing, knowing to do more with less.
Yeah,
not
it's
in a bad way, though.
It's interesting. I've seen quite a bit of Canadian animation from this period, and it has its own style and feel to it. It's definitely less produced than what you might see from
Disney.
the Disney studios, which is most of the non-Canadian animation I've seen from this period is Disney.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. So while he was at the studio, Williams would also continue playing in local jazz bands. It was a way to supplement his income because while at the studio, Williams was working on his own little film, The Little Island. Yeah, got on the bottom left there, the characters. It was inspired by the UPA animation style at the time, which put a very heavy emphasis on style and less on animation production, again, just because the costs were high, and if you weren't Disney, you didn't have the money to go around. But when the film was released, it was a very large critical... It did very well critically. It won a BAFTA for Best Animated Film, and it gave Williams the encouragement to keep pursuing this work. And so his next film, Love Me, Love Me, Love Me, was a critical success, but also a financial success. And that would allow him to open up his own studio, Richard Williams Limited.
So it must have been a pretty significant financial success if it was enough to start a studio on the back of.
Yeah, no, it was quite well received. Because again, at this point, it was being sold to theaters to be played before the main feature. Again,
okay.
Not the full feature stuff yet.
This is an important piece. So all through this period in the UK, theaters would play like A and B roll on every time you went to the theater, and I guess a bunch of the A roll was animated stuff. Is that right?
It would be shorter stuff. Yeah, again, like stuff that would play before the main feature, and Williams was able to sell the film on that basis. Yeah,
well, a number of, like, this was a huge thing looking at the history of Hammer Horror as well, because there were requirements to buy it from local source, which kind of drove the UK the UK film industry at that time. So
yeah,
interesting.
Williams being in the UK was able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So while he was at his studio, he produced mostly TV commercials for companies and also animated intro to movies. I was actually wondering, do
you want to switch over and look at some of the ads you pulled? All right.
Yeah, let's look at some of the ads.
Well, let's see if I can make this happen here. So this is, I guess, a grouping of several ads that you pulled together here. Are they mostly from this period or a bit of a mix?
A bit of a mix.
All right, let's have a look.
It's more just to show the high quality that he would produce.
That's a fascinating little ad. Yeah. This is some of the early Canadian animation that I was talking about. You see a bunch of this done for the National Film Board as well in Canada. And of course, if you're a sad little public school student like I was, you get to watch lots of National Film Board film reels because, you know, nobody's bought the school board new film in the last 70 years. So,
to be fair, the short animated films from Canada are actually quite good.
Yeah, no. And I remember this style. I don't know if it was Richard Williams specifically, but I remember this style of Canadian animation from my early childhood. Let's watch another one, unless there's anything you particularly have to say about that.
Oh, no, again, just one thing to point out is just the difference in range. Like with Williams, we can see with some of these ads, he would never just stick with one style. He was always trying to experiment. As you saw with some of those, it's very kind of sketchy, kind of loose, but as we'll see later on, there's also much more Looney Tunes-esque style of animation. So,
well, and you can tell you can tell he's done this on a very bare bones budget, this particular ad, because it's framey, it's just
lack of color.
It's very low production value. So I don't know what they paid for that ad, but there's a huge degree of artistic skill in being able to communicate the message and deliver good art within the limitations of that medium. And this is like, if you had produced that ad, that set of images, but done it on like modern high quality digital animation, it might even look worse. The graininess kind of it protects the aesthetic in a way.
Yeah, and again, just kind of was going back to with George Dunning. It's a very uniquely Canadian thing to try and do more with less.
Yeah. Okay. Let's have a look here.
Oh, this is for Rollo. Very smooth, this one. Very fluid. Oh, this one's really fun.
Okay, we got to stop and talk about the Rollo ad. Because this is something I see all the time from Williams in his work, is this like breaking to the animator.
Yeah.
Where the animator is part of the story. You see this a little bit with WB over the years, but I'm not sure I've ever seen this from Disney. Am I imagining it that it's characteristic of Williams, or is this a theme you see in a lot of his work?
Not really. That was just kind of the one-time thing. He very much kind of maintains the distinction between the animation and the animator. He doesn't break the fourth wall the same way that Warner Bros. Does.
Interesting.
He might do it for a gag, but him specifically, he focused much more on the craftsmanship of the work.
Interesting.
Conan the Barbarian stuff here. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can, if you're looking at it artistically,
yeah,
you can tell, you can see their stylistic similarities, but the feel of it is so different.
Mm-hmm. Again, he was never satisfied. He kept challenging himself and kept trying to go in unique ways.
Yeah. Again, you can see this is definitely animation on a budget.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, I don't know, it's
still great.
I love the color. It's nice.
The pencil work, it's amazing. Cool, Pata. We get a simple one there, but still comical.
Yeah, I mean it's a whole style that's just I don't think I've seen that style. I can't even remember the last time I saw that style of animation.
It's kind of Flash almost.
Yeah, that's right. It does actually remind me a lot of the early days of Flash. Anyway, so let's watch a few more here.
Yeah. Oh, this is an ad for his work. So this is animation he did for the film Charge of the Light Brigade.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm trying to think where I've anyways, it's very cool. You have a longer segment from Charge of the Light Brigade, so maybe we'll talk about that film more as we get into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's again another whole stylistic jump from what we've seen here. So there's fantastic range in his work.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting anyway.
Yeah, so you got a little play on Sleeping Beauty there, where the roles are kind of reversed. The prince is asleep, and she wakes him up with her nice smelling perfume and bath soap.
I do love looking at animated faces from before the first Japanese animated cartoons came to North America. Because like just the way that the faces are filled out and rounded. I'm not a fine arts guy.
Yeah.
But you
you and I fall on different parts of the anime question, but
but like you can, animation has never been the same. I mean, I trace it all back to the Pokemon cartoon show. Completely ruined Western animation style. Goes to my long view that there should be national segregation of art, and only consumers should be able to look across, never producers.
That's actually not a bad idea.
Anyways, let's see a couple of more, and then we'll go on from his ads.
Sure. All right. So again, just with that, again, just to kind of show the difference in style, we went from something that was a bit more Disney-esque to something that, again, is a bit lower budget, but still interesting with its different style.
Well, I mean, he's really great at delivering the low budget end of the spectrum, right? You can see he's obviously capable of filling out the screen with color and detail, but when you turn the budget numbers down, he's very talented at doing a lot with a little.
Yeah.
So, anyways, this is again a different style. So, how is this done? Is this animation on top of film? Is that what we're going to see here?
Let's see, because I think this might be a clip from one of the films he worked on, Raggedy Ann.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh no, it's something else. This is just animation. Stuff here.
Again, a great contrast there between, like that WGN ad has to be like the cheapest possible animated ad you could buy.
But it still looks good, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, and you can see his talent here as a performer. I'm sure nobody storyboarded that ad for him, right?
No, in that case, he probably just had a basic idea and just went to town.
Yeah, exactly. And he produces enough little gag movement in the animation to keep the audience's attention, which is, there's a talent all in that.
There is, and unfortunately, that would actually come back to bite him later on. But we'll get to that. Okay, I think we can take a stop here. But yeah, like he's seeing something like that, which is a tree coming to life. Simple, but very interesting, and again, very different from other stuff that he would produce. He never stuck to one style. He kept trying to innovate. He kept trying to try new things. He was an artist in every sense of the word.
Yeah, it's very interesting. He's got tremendous range. And I think one of the things, if you're just looking at them as pieces of fine art, you would miss the entrepreneurial aspect of it, right? When you look at these things, you look at them, at least to some extent, as an artist. When I look at them as business propositions, just intuitively. And you're looking at the ability to operate up and down the market in advertising, in storytelling. This is an impressive person as a businessman, not just an impressive person as an artist, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, sure. I haven't thought about it that way. All right, so let's move on. So as we've seen, Williams was definitely a very skilled animator, and he thought he was a skilled animator, or at least he did until he saw The Jungle Book. With the release of Disney's The Jungle Book in 1967, it completely knocked Williams off his feet. As he describes in his book, he crawled out of the theater on his knees and hands, realizing that he knew absolutely nothing about this medium.
I have to say, the 1967 Jungle Book was my favorite animated film as a child. It is an absolute masterpiece.
It's very
almost,
interesting because
almost in every respect.
It's very different from what Kipling it's odd because on the one hand it is very different from what Kipling's original intention. So
yeah, no, it's a completely. You almost have to completely ignore Kipling in order to appreciate.
And I understand for some people they can't quite do that, but if you kind of go into it and realize, if you just change the name, honestly, I think people would be okay with it. But yeah, no, like it was just, it's an incredible film, especially for character performance, and it just knocked Williams off his feet.
Well, and all the character, like the faces on all the animals are just so. Anyways, it's a fantastic piece of art.
Yeah, no, it is. So Williams realized that he had to do better, and so he just wrote letters and got into contact with some of those animators from Hollywood. Now, this was important because at this point in the 60s, animation was in a very odd place. Disney was still producing films, but aside from them, not much else was going on. Warner Bros. Would put out the odd cartoon, but they had basically shut down their entire animation division. With MGM had reduced the amount that they were doing. So when it came to theatrical animation, Disney was the
why? Do you know why this lull in animation occurred?
It's just kind of how it goes. One big thing was, in a weird way, once people saw a feature-length animated film the first time. So just for comparison, Snow White made a ton of money, but Pinocchio, by contrast, actually lost money when it first came out.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, that also was partially due to the fact that it came out in 1941, and Europe was a bit busy at the time.
Yes. Okay.
And now to be got even worse because one of Disney's rivals at the time, Max Fleischer, they produced an absolutely incredible Superman animated piece, and it released the same day. Sorry, it wasn't Superman. Max Fleischer did an animation adaptation of Gulliver's Travels, and it came out the exact same day as Pearl Harbor.
Oh, jeez. Okay. Yeah.
The exact same day. So, yeah. So in a weird way, kind of like the moon landing, everyone was incredibly impressed the first time, but when it came to the second and third attempts, people just didn't care.
Yeah, Moon Landing, the sequel, didn't do as well.
Yeah,
Apollo 13 managed to do okay, but
yeah, I know. And the writers changed up. This time they don't go to the moon.
There you go. Go.
But no, like, unfortunately, it's just kind of a thing where like people will see something once and they just kind of get tired and move on. And you would get some animated films that did quite well, like Dumbo did well. Again, one thing with Disney is
Dumbo
that
was what, the 40s?
Yeah, and again, it was also done on a cheaper budget. So, unfortunately,
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, again, like with all things, once people see it the first time, once you start putting out better stuff afterwards, they just lose interest. So, now another big thing as well, because in the 60s you have the rise of television and animation. This is where at the very beginning of Saturday morning cartoons.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, in some ways, I would have expected a renaissance of animation in this period because of Saturday morning cartoons. But I suppose it's a different thing, right?
Yeah, so this is the thing. So on the one hand, animation isn't doing very well theatrically. Disney is the only game in town, but when it comes to TV, it has a second life. The problem, though, and this is still, you were asking before why some animation has gone down in quality. It's just budget and time. Like with TV budgets, they're just not the same. They're nowhere near the same as what you would get for a theatrical film, and so corners have to be cut. And because you have so much animation that is cheaper and more shoddily made, and it's just constant, the perception of animation as a whole starts to go down. Compare this to animation like in the 30s and 40s, where it was seen as a fairly prestigious art form. By the time you get to the 60s, it is just, Saturday morning cartoons trying to entertain kids.
Well, this is a really important point about art, about business in general.
Mm-hmm.
Exposing lower quality versions of your work actually is reputationally damaging and actually impairs your business model more broadly. And I guess this happened to animation as a whole. Is that a reasonable assessment?
Yeah, again, it's just sort of a thing like the classic, it's the whole thing, scarcity is what produces value. Back in the 40s, we would have like Disney producing an animated film once every 2 years, and it was really, really good. But now, like in the 60s, you could just turn on the TV and every hour you would see like some animated thing. Even something like the Flintstones, while it was well received, the animation's not Disney.
Oh, the animation is kind of garbage on the old Flintstones cartoons.
Well, that was the thing as well. Like,
if you look at the WB cartoons from this era, they're not very well done either. And like they're well loved. There's lots of gags in them, but they're not actually, like, I've shown my kids WB cartoons from this era, and they're not. It's not the best era of WB. It's not the best era. Like Flintstones doesn't stand up real well.
Interesting.
There are other eras of WB that stand up a lot better than this.
But yeah, so for the Hollywood animators that had worked on theatrical releases, Williams was a bit of a light for them because it provided a way for them to. He would bring them over to work and teach at the studio, and so it was a way for a lot of them to continue to work in while the industry was going through a low point.
Interesting.
So just to go. So late 60s to the 80s. So after learning from the masters, from Disney, Warner Bros., Williams' work saw an exceptional jump in quality. Not only because he had learned from these people, but some of them were still working with him at the time. In addition to commercial work, he would do intros for films. One of the films that he did the intro for was the second Pink Panther film.
Right, okay.
He animated the Pink. Unfortunately, we can't play that because that copyright.
Yeah.
But the animation for that specifically was a combination of Williams and Ken Harris.
Yeah, okay. Well, I see in this period he did the Charge of the Light Brigade film.
Yeah, we can definitely...
You've got a longer clip of that, so I'm going to pull that up, and let's... Anytime you want me to stop, just say stop, and we'll talk about something.
Sure.
But here we go. Oh, I love these.
Yeah.
All the caricatures from the old maps.
Well, that was the thing. The animation, the style was done based off old propaganda cartoons.
Yeah.
The old Russian bear.
Everybody looking to the lion.
Yeah. Slow to rise, but at least he woke up.
Oh, you got to put on the helmet.
Yep. All right.
I can't quite tell if this is made for children or not.
The film was for adults, and with the style, it was definitely aimed more for adults. Again, it's based off of old propaganda cartoons.
Yeah.
The animation's a bit more reserved and more stylized, but again, still very interesting. Got people working down the pits.
Yeah, the coal miners.
Yeah.
The children, they yearn for the mines.
Yeah, they work for the mines. Some really great architecture there.
Well, this is all Hyde Park.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. A number of these spots are places that I like recognize from having gone there. So they are recognizable.
And would be recognizable to the UK's audience.
Yeah. You gotta love the Empire here. Oh, there's John Bull.
Yep. Industry of Earth. All right.
I just want to stop here for a second. Sure. One of the things about that intro, the audience, you might be familiar with Michael Malice's book on North Korea, right? Where he describes going on the official state tour of North Korea. And one of the things he describes about it is that today, if you hire somebody to give you a tour of Paris, they'll take you to all the art museums and all the old palaces and all the historical sites and whatever.
Yeah.
But if you go on a tour of North Korea, they take you to like power plants and steel mills and factories and stuff. One of the things that strikes me looking at this era, if you look at the diagrams of, there's still a certain pride in the industrial productivity of Western nations at this period. They still think it's a valued part of their society.
Mm-hmm.
It just an interesting reflection. This is 1968, so that it's
they
not
weren't
that
ashamed of their past. And this was 60
anyways,
years,
it's quite interesting.
Yeah. Maybe skip forward a little bit to when a bit more. There we go, right there. Oh, here we go. The Russian bear. I really love this bit coming up with the lion. Put them up. France in the background and just one jab. There we go. Oh, so good. It's just a simple punch, but that's all you needed. Don't need huge budget. Don't need too much. All the stuff there. Oh, that's great. Protect the free, defend the weak. Empire threatened, humility. But yeah, no, it's great. Again, one interesting thing you could see here is all the different phrases going on with all the word bubbles. Again, he's playing with style. He's not just...
Well, this is all blow for blow copied and parodied in Monty Python, is it not?
I mean, possibly. I would say with Williams, there's a bit more of respect, though.
Williams so he's doing this unironically.
Correct.
Python is coming along, whatever it is, 25 years later, and trying to mock it. But if Python is coming along to mock it, that means it had there's currency. There's currency in the culture for it to be mockable later, which is interesting.
Yeah. Okay, that should be enough for this. I just wanted to show the one scene where the lion punches the bear. It's so good. Just a single punch. That's all he needed.
I mean, it's a great little piece, and it goes on and on like this.
Yeah.
But I love the color in this. It's great, and I love all the little ethnic characters that are all throughout this.
It's so good.
So,
Oh,
anyways, I mean, it's a great little piece of art from this, and gives you kind of a feel for this era, I guess, of Williams's work.
Mm-hmm. All right, so just a quick thing. So in 1971, Williams was actually contacted by the Warner Bros. Animator Chuck Jones, and Chuck Jones actually asked him to create an animation adaptation of Dickens's Christmas Carol, and he did it in 9 months, which was something not thought possible, especially considering the style, which, again, playing to Williams' strength, was inspired by the illustrations of the original Christmas Carol. It wasn't cartoony. It was very much sticking to that original Victorian style, which was incredibly difficult to animate to. Yeah, we got the clip here. See what clip of the film. What? So as you can see, it's just insane. Like, look at the wrinkles on that hand.
Yeah, you can see exactly what you were getting at here. This is not 1970s typical animation.
This isn't Mickey Mouse with a glove. This is 1850s or whatever the book was published. This is Victorian style art, but animated.
Yeah, and in composition, but also in style. I mean, the hand is a good example. Anyways, let's have a look.
Yeah. Very interesting use of light and shadow in this shot.
So I think we got to point out all the dancing shadows from the firelight.
It's just incredible.
I can't imagine how much time that takes.
And you get the texture on his robe as well. Yeah, it looks a bit like a monkey. The cross hatching is insane. Just look at the pencil work on that guy. It's insane. Right, we're good.
And there goes the ghost of Christmas Present.
Yeah.
Off to make sure there's enough prisons and workhouses.
Yeah.
Brilliant portrayal of Scrooge there. Brilliant. And you can really see Williams here as not just the still artist, but the actor in the reactions and the kind of interplay between the characters. He does a great job with it in a piece like this.
Yeah, no. So this film was completed in 9 months. One of the most insane crunches ever in this industry. They were sleeping underneath their desks. Williams, in addition to animation, was also doing backgrounds. And yet they were able to pull it out of the fire, and for this film, they would win an Oscar for Best Short Animated Film.
Short animated film. How long's the film? Do you know?
Approximately 25 minutes, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Again,
a format that's a format that's, I mean, I guess 25 minutes isn't all that different than a half-hour TV show at the time.
Yeah, that's the thing. This would have been something that aired on, TV for a Christmas special.
Yeah.
Something that, streaming has kind of killed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a format that, in some ways, the short film is kind of a format that is more accessible today than it's been for a while, because streaming doesn't have time slots in the way that TV had time slots. So it
doesn't, but at the same time, the streamers also do prioritize people being on their platforms for longer. So they do prioritize content that's longer.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, like every episode of Stranger Things is like an hour. So,
well, and even just producing content for YouTube, like the longer your content is, it's actually long content is actually privileged rather than disprivileged in the algorithm.
Well, that killed animation on YouTube back in like 20 when that out for a while on YouTube. You could actually make decent money being an animator, and some of the original YouTube animators, Psychic Pebbles, OniNG, Eagle Raptor, were able to actually get a decent go at it. But around 2013, YouTube changed the algorithm, and it just killed animation on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried for this channel to produce short content, and unless it qualifies as formally a YouTube short, and then has a separate algo, you can't. The 5 to 15 minute piece, you have to already have an audience and not care that YouTube isn't going to give you any money for it.
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, it's just long content. Shorter stuff kind of got the axe. Would also do some animation for Raggedy Ann, Musical Adventure. Again, animation is very good, but kind of flew under the radar. He would also direct another half-hour Christmas special, Ziggy's Gift. And for that, he would get an Emmy this time for that. So, again, very prestigious. And all those awards did not go unnoticed. It caught the eye of one Steven Spielberg, who was and here we get to probably Williams' most important work, Who Framed Roger Rabit.
Yeah, this is what I knew Williams for.
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot of people.
This was presented to me by my father when I was a child as if it was the masterpiece of all animation.
Well, it very much is.
And it's I mean, the quality of the animation is fantastic.
Yeah. So, just a little bit of background. So, in 1987, Spielberg approached Williams to serve as the animation director for the upcoming live-action animation hybrid film, Who Framed Roger Rabit. Now, interestingly, despite this being the highlight of his career, Williams was actually quite hesitant to work on the film. Williams didn't enjoy animation live-action hybrid because, in his opinion, all the stuff before, it just looked bad. And one thing you can, in films like Mary Poppins,
I was going to reference Mary Poppins.
Yeah,
reference Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Well, in all these cases, it's not impressive to me.
Yeah, the animation is good, but you can clearly tell that they're not there. Now,
well, they're also playing it like with a lot of new technology. You can see in its first use that it's being played for gags, just like in The Wizard of Oz, where they switched from black and white to color because color's a novelty at that time.
Yeah.
And in the same way, in Mary Poppins, you can tell that the switch into animation hybrid with film is a gag for a section of the film. You're supposed to be impressed by the technical brilliance.
Interesting little tidbit. That wasn't even the first hybrid between animation and live action. Walt lied because he did it 20 years earlier.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Now, if people are interested, look up Laugh-O-Gram's Alice in Wonderland. Walt Disney did it 20 years earlier. He lied.
I didn't know that he claimed that it was the first, but anyways,
it was definitely a big part of the marketing. Walt was I have a lot of respect for Walt, but he was a bit of a foxy businessman.
Well, I mean, I admire Walt as much for his. I mean, the perfect way to remember Walt is by his statue where he holds Mickey Mouse's hand and like looks over his kingdom. He was an empire builder. He wasn't an artist in the way that, like, when you look at
an artist, because in a sense, he was always trying to elevate his films. Again, just like speaking as an artist side, Disney is interesting because, like we were talking about earlier, you were viewing things from the business side.
Yeah.
For us, Disney was kind of like the ultimate suit because he did have an artistic background. Again, if people are interested, you can actually find Walt Disney when he did animation himself. He did an interesting take on Red Riding Hood. So while he wasn't the best, he still had that sense in him. And so while he was definitely out to make money, he also did want to make art. And he would take risks on things that.
Well, but this is what I was going to get at. He's like the Henry Ford of animation.
Very much so.
Because he's got like a deep expertise in the content, like a lot of the kind of Gilded Age entrepreneurs had. I mean, Henry Ford knew how to put a car together from base parts. And in the same way, it's very obvious that Walt Disney knew how to produce all of his content from zero to finished product. Mm-hmm. He understood every part of the process. And because he understood every part of the process, he was able to produce a business that just produced excellent art at the same time. But the reason I call Walt not an artist is not because I suppose in a technical sense he is, but first and foremost, Walt is he has a vision for a world that he wants to create. Very much like Mr. Hershey built Hershey, Pennsylvania as like a model city. Walt always kind of wanted to create his own little
America in a sense.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a very rough childhood, and so his dream was he wanted to try and create a world that was a bit, I wouldn't say softer, but a bit kinder than the one he grew up in.
Yeah.
A bit.
And he's completely obsessed with like pre-war America the way it was really certainly before the Second War, before FDR, right?
Yeah, no.
And
again, for Disneyland or Disney World, for those who have gone, the first place you go into is Main Street, USA, and it's based off of the small town that he lived in growing up in, I believe. Yeah, it was based off of that.
Well, and all the businesses are before the franchising of America.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a vision of the owner-operator as this kind of essential part in America where you could relate to every business owner that operated the town. And it's an idea of the world as full of like creative, engaging people.
Mm-hmm. So that's what also made Walt interesting. While he definitely had a vision, he surrounded himself with incredibly talented people, and he would take advantage of that. So, like, for example, with Snow White, while he did have the overall vision of what that film would be, there was a policy at the studio. If you had a cool idea and you pitched it to Walt, the film would get in and you would get $25.
Yeah, no, he did bonuses for having different
Yeah.
gags and so on. It's a kind of an incredible story how he made the film. Um, but but coming back to the hybrid between live film and animation, we have Walty does this kind of marketing exercise, and I guess our friend Mr. Williams wasn't a big fan of running this as a gag.
It
And you
just
can
didn't
see
look well because you could tell it wasn't really there.
Well, you can see in Who Framed Roger Rabbit that it's no longer a gag. Exactly.
Yeah, no, it is like this is a world. It's a comedy film, but they're playing it straight. Like this is a world where humans and cartoons do interact.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like a real part of the world, and it's very weird because I don't know that there's any other film that participates in a world anything like that.
Well,
anyways, we should
that came out afterwards, but not to the same extent.
Yeah, so we got a piece from the screen test for it. I think we should watch it. If you haven't seen Who Framed Roger Rabbit, you should stop this stream now and you should go
watch it
and come back because it is an impressive film.
Now, I'll just kind of give some one bit of information why this film was so revolutionary compared to stuff before. Now, if you look at animation live action hybrids before, when they have the animated characters with the humans, the camera is always very stagnant, and there's a reason for that. So film is recorded at 24 frames per second. That means for animation, you would have to do 24 different drawings for just 1 second of runtime. For most, even on bigger budget films like Disney, they tend to animate on twos, not just because it's cheaper and easier, but in many ways it actually does look better. Having more frames last for a bit longer helps to make the animation look a bit more grounded. The problem, though, is camera moves. When you do camera moves, the animation has to be on ones. And so because of that, with the animated hybrid films, there's very little camera moves because they didn't want the animators to have to animate on ones for those sections. With Who Framed Roger Rabbit, as you'll see here, the camera is always moving, which meant that for every single frame, there was a different drawing.
All right, let's have a look at the screen test here.
The stuff's actually moving there. And again, notice how the character is moving in perspective with the camera.
And looking at that, one of the things that really strikes me is we're done with low budget Richard Williams. That is incredibly detailed animation. All his tunes through this film, all of his backgrounds when they go into Toonland, they're all.
This is Disney money.
There's no corners cut. There's no nothing. It's it's financing his dream, I guess.
Financing his dream would come later, but this was Disney money, and he put it to good work.
Yeah, so I mean, it's great stuff. The character of Roger Rabbit, some of the other characters that are in, you can definitely see his showmanship in the way that they're produced. Obviously, there's lots of other people working on this film, but he does a really great job producing the interaction. And I'm sure, like, you have to have such a good sense for this because you're producing the film and you're producing the cartoon on different mediums, and to make them interact elegantly is just an incredible piece of skill.
Well, again, just kind of one interesting thing. Again, like the film, again, for those who haven't seen it, it takes place in like 1930s, 40s Hollywood during the golden age of animation. And as mentioned earlier, the animations that this film was inspired by, those animators had taught Williams in the 60s. So this is, while it is absolutely a demonstration of Williams' skills, in many ways it's also him paying tribute to his teachers in a sense.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and there's a portrayal of that society there.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think is kind of interesting is that there's a little bit of a different portrayal of the adult world that you see in Williams,
Mm-hmm.
in a kid's production here. So if you watch Disney from the beginning through to the 50s or early 60s, the portrayal of adult relationships is very it's very it's very storybook. It's very different than what you see. You have like an unapologetically sexy cartoon in which is like weird, right?
He designed her himself.
Yeah. And I thought that looking at some of Williams's ads, he definitely has that dimension to him. He's not just like a kid's artist, or he doesn't kind of think of himself that way, I guess.
He did also, as we mentioned earlier, did have a bit of that fine art background. And so, again, one big thing with that is life drawing. And, having done a lot of life drawing myself, you just gain just a general respect for the human body. This is something that I've had to kind of explain to people. When you're doing nude life drawings, in a weird way, I'm not really looking at the person in a not in a sexual way, because it is just like, okay, what's that hand doing? How what's the curve of that body?
Yeah,
it's a respect for something of beauty, but not in a lustful way, but in a sense of like, this is something of craft, and it deserves respect, like all beauty does.
Yeah, I mean, there's an integrated aspect to it where it's part of life,
Yeah.
So that it's an interesting part, and it's an interesting. I mean, it's a 1987 film. This is actually kind of an interesting moment in culture where the way that romance is displayed to children starts to change a little bit. You can think whatever you want of it, but Williams is definitely part of that moment.
Yeah, for better or for worse.
Yeah. So the film is interesting, and in some ways, the mark of a film that is particularly influential is like, if you look before it and look after it.
It had a huge influence on animation.
Yeah. Animation is not the same afterwards. Animation is not the same before. You want to say that Williams made a mark in the industry. This is the mark. Yeah.
So just to kind of give a bit of perspective, before this film, Disney was they were still trying to find their footing. Once Walt passed, this animated films, they weren't bad, but they just kind of lacked the same magic. Before this, Disney was pumping out stuff like Black Cauldron and Great Mouse Detective, Oliver and Company, which are decent, but they don't have the same spark. After this, you were going to get films like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Sleeping Beauty, films that have questionable themes, but undeniably are of a much higher quality.
The other thing about this film is it feels to me like a weird tribute to the old Walt Disney Studio.
It absolutely is, because like I said, again, like he learned from those guys. It very much is. Like, it is a tribute to that animation style of animation done by someone who was taught by those animators.
Well, and so in a strange way, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a more rooted film than a lot of other animated films, right? If you go back and look at Snow White is a rooted film because it's drawing on these themes that are very ancient, very, very ancient in the culture, and you can kind of feel that when you watch the film. And in a weird way, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is actually a bit like that, because it draws on themes in that by this point are deep in the culture.
Yeah.
Just because of what Saturday morning cartoons were to the generations after the war, I guess.
In a sense. So, yeah, one thing also just to point out, Williams' dedication to artistic perfection led to significant delays, and there were clashes with some of the Disney executives who demanded the film be finished. At one point, one thing for Williams, he was able to work on the studio. He was able to work on the film at his London studio. He didn't want to move to LA. He didn't want to be in that bubble. But at one point, Disney was so concerned about the film getting done that they actually got a second studio in California just to finish some of the scenes.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on just a quick bit. So despite some of the behind the scenes drama, the film was an incredible success. On a budget of approximately $70 million, earned $351.5 million worldwide, won 4 Oscars, including a special achievement for Mr. Williams. In 2016, Who Framed Roger Rabbit was selected by the Library of Congress to be preserved in the National Film Registry. And just to say, as of this recording, there are 900 films in the National Film Registry, and only 50 are animated in any way.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I think like it is objectively a historically significant film in a way
Absolutely.
most aren't, and in a way a lot of successful films aren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like for better or for worse, Jurassic Park is a historically significant film. So, anyways, we're about halfway through, I think. So, do we want to maybe call episode 1 here, and then we'll come back and we'll do an episode 2 looking at the back half of Williams's career?
Yeah, we've talked about the rise of Richard, and now we'll cover the fall tomorrow. We'll cover the fall next time.
We'll cover the fall next time. There's a couple of points here I want to kind of draw in here. Richard Williams is a creature of the Anglo diaspora of the post-war era, right? He worked much of his life in London for companies operating from the U.S.
U.S., UK,
Canada. In a number, yeah, exactly. U.S., UK, Canada. There was an Anglosphere in this time where you could work pretty seamlessly across borders and across cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And yet you can see in the contrast between Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Charge of the Light Brigade, all the individual cultures of those Anglosphere territories are still really intact. So the fact that you can kind of move around between them hasn't yet homogenized them. That's a world that existed in this time. I think now that's a world that is more or less, I mean, maybe it'll recover, but at the moment it seems pretty dead. The past is a foreign country moment for me, watching Richard Williams and watching kind of his career.
Oh, it absolutely is. Again, like the fact that he could pick up, go to Spain, and then go to the UK and find opportunities in all those places for artists is just unfortunately something that's just not really around anymore.
Yeah, there's that part. I mean, he goes and integrates into those societies pretty seamlessly into the art world. So they're not really siloed, but they're also still distinctive. And
again, as mentioned, like he didn't want to work in LA for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. He was very dead set on I stay in London because there was a distinction still at this time between the UK and the US, and even in a big city like London was still distinct from LA. I don't think that's as much the case now.
Well, now London and Toronto and these other Anglosphere cities are now dominated by a kind of global monoculture.
Yeah.
And even as recently as 1988, like even I remember going to London when I was a child. The degree of distinction and the degree of separation from the global monoculture was vastly greater than it is today. And I think a lot of that is just the tearing down of the old parts of, like, for example, I think it's a tremendous loss the way that Shakespeare has been treated in the modern theater, right?
They just bring it back to subvert him.
Well, like one of the so those who follow this channel will know that I homeschool my children. One of the things that I kind of had on the back of my mind when I was a kid, I used to go to a place called Young People's Theater, and then later to Stratford almost every year. I went to
Stratford once; it was quite nice.
Yeah, very nice. And you could at Stratford, you could always see a Shakespeare play straight, right? You'd see a straight classical performance of Shakespeare. Now, it is almost impossible to find a single theater in Southern Ontario that will do Shakespeare and do it straight, right? Now you can only get Shakespeare done as subversion.
Unfortunately, yeah. Like even the Shaw Theatre Festival in Niagara, they don't really do Shakespeare.
Well, they don't do Shakespeare there. They do Shaw because Shaw is like an evil leftist.
Yeah, no. Last time I was there, I saw they were doing an adaptation of Prince Caspian from Chronicles of Narnia, and Prince Caspian was Chinese.
Yeah, that's right. You can't even you can't get any of the Anglo culture that once made Toronto distinct from New York, distinct from LA, distinct from Tokyo. Yeah. All of that was wiped away in the beginning in the 90s, I think. And Richard Williams is really living in the very last part of that world in the Anglosphere. And it's interesting to see his height at kind of what almost might be the last moment
of tail end of the Anglosphere height.
Yeah. So I just think that's an interesting thing about him and about figures from Canada from the post-war era who kind of live in this world that in some ways the communicability of ideas and elites across borders in this period is what ultimately leads to its demise. So it's not really a sustainable kind of thing, but they get to live in this moment before it collapses. So
yeah, they get to enjoy the autumn of civilization. They don't see the winter.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Williams lived a lot longer, so we can decide.
He's again. We'll leave it. We'll cut it here, but because he's about to experience winter. But if you don't want to know that, if you want the story to end with happy roses, just stop here, guys.
That's Williams, all, folks.
Yeah, he went on. He retired. He went off into the sunsets.
There you go. Anyways, is there anything you want to shell for the audience members who might not be familiar with your work?
Actually, I do. One of our buddies, Kryptos, I'll actually be having a guest article on his Substack on June 30th, I believe. It was an article I wrote back in December for another project that ultimately didn't go through. So it'll be interesting because it was a critique of MAGA before the events of this
became
year
popular.
Yeah, which is really annoying because it's like,
yeah,
come on, guys. Oh no, so it was. I'm interested to see a bit of the response. Now it is a bit antagonistic because originally the project was I would write an essay and then someone would make a response to my essay and then I would respond back. So
yeah,
it's a bit antagonistic. But I'm interested to see how people will read it. My only concern now is that, I'm just going to be seen as another, Trump doomsdayer where,
yeah. Well,
I did it before it was cool, guys.
Well, it'll depend. How it's received, I think, will depend a lot on how the Iran thing plays out.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll have to see, I guess.
Yeah, I know.
Anyways, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'd like to do more profiles of great Canadians who have achieved things. I'd like to go a little outside of the post-war window if I can, but I mean, this is the great era of animation and film, so you kind of, for Canadians who had achievement in this field, that's where you have to go. So it's been great to have you on. It's been great to look at the work of Richard Williams, and great to learn who was responsible for a bunch of interesting things that I'd seen in my life and never really kind of knew anything about before I was encouraged to look into this a little bit.
Yeah, the world of cartoons is a fascinating place.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you all soon.
Canada originally was put together by two groups of people who didn't have much in common but didn't want to be American.
The line just popped into my head. A bunch of the boys was a-whooping it up. And there I got my start.
We have had a flag. Flags can be changed. But flags cannot be imposed, the sacred symbols of a people's hopes and aspirations, by the simple, capricious, personal choice of a Prime Minister of Canada.
I have watched this country for half of my life from abroad, and we have turned complacency into just that, a national sport.
I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me.